Hey, how's it going? So today we're going to be painting this moody little cottage scene and I'm going to walk you through my process. Let's get started. So I start my paintings, like 99% of them, with a rough sketch, like a really rough sketch. I like to have something on paper so I have an idea of where I'm going. I do make a lot of changes whenever I go in with my underpainting. So this is the underpainting for the cottage. Because I'm using a traditional gouache, it's water soluble. So I'm keeping my underpainting kind of analogous with what I want the final colors to be. If you were using like an acrylic paint or an acrylic ink, you could go in with, like a lot of other artists you see do, a sepia or a bright orange or pink or some kind of underpainting like that, and it creates a really cool effect. With gouache, you run the risk, especially if you're not super comfortable using gouache, of mudding up the colors because you can lift the color from behind. And if whatever you're putting on top, for instance, if you did a pink background and you added some green on top, you could just end up with brown. So you just want to be careful with that. I like to go in and just lay out where I want everything to be, the very first rough, messy layer, and it kind of finalizes where I want things to be. I do still make changes. I make a lot of changes as I go. I went in with a lot more detail in the clouds and sky early on because I am painting over them. I'm putting the trees and leaves and the chimney and things like that. And the clouds are just layered black, white, stone blue, one on top of the other. I use like a wet on wet technique to get kind of the cloudy, granular almost look to it. So I go in with like the super dark gray, and while it's still wet, go in with a very wet white brush. I like to use a pretty heavy black line to kind of delineate where I want some of the details to be. It's easy enough to kind of cover and even make part of the final painting. It creates like cool shadow and helps create a cool effect. It also helps me decide which features to keep and which ones I don't really love. So this small circular window that you see here, I go over it a couple times. I try to move it around. I lift some of the lines so that I can try adding them differently and see if I like it better. I do not. I just remove the window and I take this as an opportunity to do, again, a wet on wet technique to kind of add some interest and color variation to the cottage itself. I am going to go in with detail on top of it, but it's important to have a little detail and variation underneath where the detail is so it doesn't all just look flat. I'm adding some foliage behind the house and to the tops of the trees. This is just the first layer. You're going to go in with like a dark green, sometimes a dark green mixed with a blue. I don't use specific colors. I tend to use what's on my palette and I mix them around. So they're never a pure color once I get to them. Otherwise, I would give you specifics. I decided that the leafiness on the left side of the painting wasn't really doing the painting any justice, so I kind of lifted those and added more storm clouds instead. I'm going into this tree on the right, and in my previous painting, I did some really cool swirling kind of geometric details on the tree bark. I really loved the way it looked, so I decided to bring it in to this painting as well to add some interest. I'm going in with dark, like a dark brown, dark umber mixed with a few other colors. Sorry, it's all mixed. And then I come in with like a tannish color mixed with some, maybe a little bit of sienna or more of that dark umber, but I bring in a lighter color to highlight those swirls and really bring out the detail. It really makes the tree stand out and I think it looks cool. I came in, like I said, to kind of paint over. I'm doing additional layers just to make sure the green that was underneath is completely covered. Um, Now on the foliage that I left, I'm going in with like the next layers, which is some lighter leaves, just to break up that dark green. I kind of painted them all in the same direction. I wanted it to kind of look like there was some strong winds maybe happening, but I didn't want it to be too dramatic. And then I went in and added a little bit more shadow because I kind of overdid it with the highlights. I'm adding a little bit more of the foliage in the tree behind the cottage, and I added like a little wood shed attached to the side of the cottage here. I just think it is an interesting little detail. I'm adding shadows and a little bit more line work to the roof. So with the leaves on the trees, I'm just kind of trying to layer the greens to bring a little bit of saturation and brightness to it, make it look more like leaves and less like a solid color. So, when it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and the sun is out and it's bright, and then a storm suddenly rolls in and there's all this diffuse light and the sky is dark, but for some reason, despite how dark it is, the trees and the grass and the bushes look incredibly saturated. That's kind of the look that I'm going for. I really love the way it looks when it storms during like that afternoon light. I don't know. I think it's really beautiful. So that's kind of what I'm going for when I'm layering up the greens in the trees and foliage for this painting. I started this layered stone detail on the cottage. I thought it would be a really cool idea, but I knew it was going to be work intensive. So I decided to do a test section. Um, right now, it's just taking the very tiniest brush that I have and making just each individual little layered. I didn't want it to be bricks. I didn't want it to be perfect square bricks. But because this was so much work, I wanted to make sure it was going to look cool. So I came in with a little bit of highlights just to test and see if I was going to like it. And I gave it a minute to dry. While it was drying, I added a little bit more foliage and greenery to the front of the house, so I knew exactly where some of these layered stones might go. I wouldn't do more work than I needed to. Once it was dry, I thought the highlights were pretty cool. I know that you can't really tell in this very tiny section, but I am going in and just creating line after line after line of really intense little layered stone. This was actually so much fun. I got caught up doing this and ended up staying awake until about 3 o'clock in the morning because I lost track of time. I don't know why it's so much fun. It's really simple. It really is just a bunch of little rectangles and tiny stones tucked into cracks. Anybody can do this. I think you just have to be patient and trust the process. When you first lay the lines down over the gray in the background, it looks a little flat, even with the color variation behind the black lines. But don't lose hope. I promise. You just have to keep working through it. I spent a lot of time going over each little tiny piece. I managed to keep it very, very straight. If you cannot, feel free to use lines, cut across, measure, do what you have to do. I was able to keep this pretty straight. I think it's because I was using like a layered stone instead of strictly a brick, just a straight line brick. So if things started to look a little crooked, I could add a flatter stone, or I could add like a gap that looked natural for the pattern that I was doing. We're getting very close to the end of the brick pattern here. At this point in time, it is probably 2:15, 2:30 in the morning, and I have no concept of what time it is. I think everyone should give it a try. It's really therapeutic. I thought it was wonderful. So here I'm coming in with just white. It's like white and light gray. And I'm literally just putting like thin little lines on the brick so that it looks more 3D, so they look like they're sticking out. I'm using my finger to wipe away any excess white or to diffuse the color a little bit. I'm going in on the bricks around the doors and windows and adding little highlighted bits, not because there's a lot of direct bright light shining on these bricks, but because it makes them look 3D. Value is really important every step of the way if you want something to pop, and bringing in highlights even in a diffused dark scene like this is really going to make the bricks pop. So don't be afraid to go in with white highlights. If you feel like they're too intense, you can always go back and lighten them. Just do it. Just go in with the white, highlight every little piece, and then stand back and see how you feel about it after it dries. After the really intense brick situation here, I added a little bit more detail to the tree and blacked out the windows. I decided this tree on the left would be better, like a dead barren tree. I think they're interesting looking and they're really beautiful. I wanted to throw this tree back up over the clouds here, but I'm not adding any kind of leaves or greenness to it. So the top window is lit. I wanted there to be a little bit of story behind the cottage, and if all the windows are just dark, I don't know. I think that would have left something a little bit lacking. When I was painting the upstairs window, I realized I had not added the stone to the chimney. So I went back and added the stone to the chimney so that it would all be cohesive and match up. I went in and changed the coloring on the door. Obviously, the door still was just the underpainting brown. I went in again with kind of like a darker tan color. I just wanted to add a little bit of interest to the door. I'm not really sure why my camera is shaking here. I have no idea. Maybe my house was shaking. I don't really know. Anyway, so I finally went in and paid some attention to the roof as well. I just have a little angled brush and I went in with a little bit of brown. I left it a little bit rough to leave some texture behind. I thought it looked cool. I will go and add more details later. I'm coming back in and working on the foliage here. This is just like some little grass and leaves. It's the same concept as with the leaves in the trees. You start with a darker green color and you just layer over the top little bits of lighter green and lighter green. I created a shingle effect on the roof here just by adding some, again, simple squiggly black lines. They're like the wood shingles. That's what I was using as reference. With a little bit of textured layered brown and then the black lines. It doesn't take a lot for it to read correctly. And I thought it worked really well with the overall look of the cottage. Here with the stone on the ground, I'm going in, it's the same technique I used for both the clouds and the actual cottage itself. It's just layering wet on wet of gray and white to give it a little bit of interest. With this yellow window, I wanted it to look like the lights were on and there was a little bit of a glow because it is a dark and moody scene. I just added some highlights on the stone and roof around the window. If I were using an acrylic or something that wasn't water soluble, I would probably have added more of a glow around the window, but I didn't want to smudge things. So I wasn't really sure how to accomplish more, but I think it gets the point across and looks really good. At this point in the painting, I pretty much just have the final foliage. I added some details to the bushes in front of the house. Again, dark green, mid green, and then a light green layered over the top in like vague leaf shapes. Around the stones, I added a dark green and I'm letting that dry. I want it to be mossy around the stones. I'm coming in with, again, dark green to make kind of a grass and foliage around the left side of the lawn. I'm also adding little swirly bits for there to be ferns. We have a lot of ferns up here where I live, so I think they're beautiful and I like the way they look, so I added them in. Now with the moss, to look like moss, you just layer it with a lighter kind of olivey green and then come in on top with some yellow, and you'll just dot in a little bit of yellow. I use my fingers a lot, so I will dab it in with a small brush and then use my finger to break it up, just like I did with the highlights on the stones. I'm also going in with black around the edges of the stones. I'm not going to leave the heavy black line. I go in with a damp brush, which I'm doing right now, and I lighten those heavy black lines so that it's more of a shadow. And then I finalize the foliage by just adding some highlights to the ferns. I think they look super cute. I did look at the finished painting and decide that it needed a little bit more interest, so I added a little friend up in this top window here, my lovely little black cat. I think it adds a little bit of story to the painting. Tell me what you think. I really had fun painting this. I hope you like it, and I hope to hear from you. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you at the next video. Bye, guys.